Hello, and welcome to another Exercise, etc. webinar. Today's topic is Old Age is Not Contagious, Ageism, and the Fitness Industry. My name is Guy Andrews, and I'll be your instructor today. I know that I have met many of you in the almost 30 years that I've worked with Exercise, etc., traveling across the country, presenting live continuing education programs. But if we have never met in person, my background is I've got almost 40 years in the fitness industry. I've got a master's degree in education from Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, and I've got, like so many of you, a slew of different credentials. Currently, I am only working with older adults. I no longer work with a younger demographic. I have been a senior fitness specialist for the city of Wilton Manors, Florida, for going on 8 years now. I took just over a year off due to the pandemic, as I know many of you have done as well, but what I am doing for Wilton Manors includes presenting classes on strength and conditioning for older adults, as well as balance and fall prevention and cognition retention programs. I work with a great group of people, and of all the different things I have done in fitness and of all the different hats I have worn over the last 40 years or so, my work with the seniors in Wilton Manors has been both the most enjoyable and the most rewarding gig that I've ever had. I am recording this right now in my home office in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in front of a live audience. They're pretty easy. They're usually very quiet, unless the mailman comes, and they always give me good reviews. I know that you are here because you want the education, but I know you also want continuing education credits. What we have here is a partial list of the different organizations who approve Exercise, etc. continuing education programs. Hopefully, you will see one or more of the credentials you hold on this list. At the very end of our webinar, we will discuss how to get your continuing education certificates, but it is quite straightforward. After you watch the webinar, you will complete a very quick 10-question quiz. Your quiz is graded instantly on our website, and you are immediately sent your continuing education certificate via email. It is a very fast, quick, easy, and efficient way to get your continuing education credits. But we'll talk about this in more detail at the end of our webinar. The 10-question quiz that I just mentioned is based completely on the printed material in this handout, which is, of course, the slideshow we're going to review together right now. Your quiz is not based on what I am saying. It is based on what is written in your handout. Our topic today is ageism. And ageism, like any of the other isms of which you are no doubt aware, is prejudice or discrimination that is directed against a particular group. Ageism is based on the deeply held belief that one age group is superior to another. It can work in different ways, but generally when we talk about ageism, we are talking about prejudice or discrimination that is aimed at older adults. It can go the other way as well. Older people can be ageist as well, and often they might feel that being old is better than being young. So ageism can be directed at younger folks as well, but in the context of life in the 2020s, when we talk about ageism, we usually talk about prejudice or discrimination directed at older adults. Psychologists believe that ageism is a direct result of what is called gerontophobia, or a fear of growing older. Interestingly, when we take a look at people who are ageist, they are more afraid of growing old than they are of dying. So ageism is not really a fear of mortality or of dying, but a fear of growing older. It is based on the idea that old people are naturally inferior to young people for a variety of reasons, but it's based on a fear of aging and eventually of our own mortality. Some researchers have referred to ageism as the last acceptable ism. If there were a discrimination hall of fame, you would see there, of course, sexism and racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and many more. But when they say that ageism is the last acceptable ism, it is because in many different environments, ridiculing older adults or doing presentations based on a caricature of what it is to be old are found to be deeply humorous and socially acceptable. The term ageism was coined just over 50 years ago in 1969, and it was based on the same concepts we saw and the same levels of prejudice and discrimination we see in sexism, racism, and other types of isms. When we take a look at ageism and age, what we see is that throughout human history, different societies have placed different values on age and the aging process. In pre-industrial societies, generally, older adults were revered and honored. They were treated with respect and with dignity. For much of human history, older adults were valued because they were the conduits of information from one generation to another. They were the ones who enforced social customs. They were the ones that kept the oral histories alive. They were valued as sources of wisdom and knowledge and information. They were instrumental in keeping the family unit together. But what is interesting between pre-industrial societies and now is that until the end of World War II, until the mid-20th century, older adults were not as common as they are now. In fact, as recently as the end of World War II, the average life expectancy in America was somewhere in the early to mid-60s. Right now, it has moved up to the early to mid-80s. The point here is that older adults may have been honored more and revered more when there were fewer of them. But right now, older adults are very, very common in society. They are not unique. And things that are not unique, that are common, may not be valued as much as things that are a bit more rare or uncommon. In post-industrial world, or in industrial societies, power is generally held by middle-aged people. If we take a look right now in the 2020s, we'll see that in Washington, D.C., on Wall Street, in organized religion, politics, government, business, by and large, the positions of power and authority are held by middle-aged folks and older folks. And that is the contradiction here. We live in a society in which ageism is rampant. We live in a society in which it is a common belief that youth is superior to old, but the other side of that coin is that in many cases, middle-aged and older people have the power, have the authority, and have the financial resources. It's regarded in some circles as a matter of fact that Asian cultures value their elders more than we do in the West. But this is not necessarily engraved in stone. An article in the International Journal of Psychology back in 2017 questioned this entire hypothesis. What they have found is that traditionally, yes, Asian cultures revered their elders more than was seen in the West. But over time, as Asian cultures have adopted more and more Western values, Western manners, and Western habits, we are seeing ageism becoming more and more prevalent even in Asian cultures. So as the world becomes more and more Westernized, the culture of youth, the idea that youth somehow is superior to age, is becoming more prevalent across many different cultures and many different ethnicities. Old age is not contagious. So what's with the idea of older adults being in quarantine? And when I'm saying a quarantine right now, I don't mean that a quarantine like we saw with the pandemic. In the United States, people tend to live and to associate with other people of a same or similar age group. We tend to segregate by choice by age. By 2025, It is estimated that 56 million seniors in our society will live in age-restricted communities. Typically what that means is over 55 communities. The New York Times referred to this as living in a geezer ghetto. These age-restricted communities tend to segregate older people to the exclusion of younger people and younger families. And as the different generations become more segregated, with less interaction, we see that there are more differences between the age groups. There is less interaction and less understanding of how other age groups live and work. The 56 million seniors who live in age-restricted communities live in different types of communities. One of them, or one type of community, is called a continuing care retirement community, or a CCRC. A CCRC is a community in which older adults, generally after the age of 55, although I've seen it as low as age 50, move into independent living facilities in a community. It might be a single-family home, it might be a villa, it might be an apartment, but they live independently, just as you and I do. But in a CCRC, as people get older and as they are less able to live alone, they eventually are able to move into an assisted living facility. Over time, if their health continues to deteriorate, or if they are at fall risk, or if their cognition begins to decline, they might move into a skilled nursing facility on the same campus. So in a CCRC, it's kind of like a one-stop shop for all of our late life residential needs, from independent living to assisted living to skilled nursing. That's what it's called, a CCRC. These communities generally are not cheap, and they are not covered by Medicare or Medicaid, so they are always a private care type of, or a private pay type of community. In addition to a CCRC, 1/3 of all aging baby boomers live in what is called a naturally occurring retirement community, or a NORC, N-O-R-C. You might not be aware of the term, but you're probably aware of a community that would qualify as a NORC. For example, Wilton Manors, where I teach senior fitness, could be considered a naturally occurring retirement community. The city was developed by and large after World War II, when young couples, young GIs, moved into very inexpensive housing to raise their families. And for the first 20 years or so of Wilton Manor's existence, it was home to young couples raising children. But what happens is, as you know, kids grow up and they move out. So 20 or 30 years after World War II, the community was filled with middle-aged people, empty nesters, living independently in the community. But time keeps passing, and eventually those middle-aged folks turn into older adults. And the community was very, very filled with older adults still living independently in the homes where they had lived for 20, 30, 40 years. But now the community is gentrifying. The older adults are dying off slowly, and the homes now are either being inherited by their kids or grandkids, or being sold to young couples with children. So the entire generational cycle begins again. So a naturally occurring retirement community is a community where many older adults live, and it just occurred organically over time. That's a NORC, or naturally occurring retirement communities. We talk often in our discussion of ageism about the different generations. And when we talk about ageism in the fitness industry, baby boomers become our target demographic. This is the group that was born between 1946 and 1964. Many of you guys watching, like me, are probably aging baby boomers. We are all between the ages right now in 2021 of 57 and 75. Generally, the parents of the baby boomers were the greatest generation, that World War II generation. But that generation is dying off very, very quickly. The youngest members of the greatest generation are 97, so they're in their late 90s. So we're not seeing a whole lot of these folks in the gym or in fitness training anymore, because these are old people. My parents were both members of the greatest generation, and both of them, if they were still alive, would be well into their early 100s. The generation we talk about very commonly when we discuss ageism after the baby boomers is the millennials. Born between 1980 and 1994, this is the largest generation that America has ever produced. Right now, they're between the ages of 27 and 41. So they are in their prime years for developing a career, for childbearing, and so forth. So when we take a look at the different generations, and if we discuss baby boomers versus millennials versus the greatest generation, here's a chart that details the birth years of these folks and their ages in the early 2020s. The aging of the baby boomers has led to what is referred to as the graying of America. And thanks to the baby boomer generation, who until the millennials came along, were the largest generation at 76 million members that this country had ever produced. Now, if we take a look at how the aging demographic has changed, we see a significant increase in the number of elders in the United States. Back in 1950, when the majority of baby boomers were not yet born, only 8% of the U.S. population was over the age of 65. In the late 40s, early 50s, life expectancy was somewhere in the mid-60s. Right now, life expectancy is somewhere in the early to mid-80s. So over the last 70 years or so, we have seen a dramatic increase in life expectancy. Right now, in the early 2020s, about 19% of the American population is over 65. And this number is going to continue to swell until somewhere around 2030, the baby boom population will reach its maximum number of older adults, and there will be about 20 to 22% of the American population over the age of 65. Starting around 2030, the baby boom generation is going to start dying off quickly. By 2050, as the boomers continue to die off, we're going to see the millennials start to hit the age of 65. And the number of older Americans is going to skyrocket even higher than we saw with the baby boom generation. It's projected that by 2050, the number of older adults in our country will hit 25% of the overall population. Compare that to 100 years earlier to what the percentage of seniors was in 1950. What's interesting is some statisticians believe that the number of aging millennials will be higher than 25% of the population, because currently it is projected that while older adults keep increasing in our country, the American birth rate is going to keep decreasing, which means that the percentage of millennials will be a much larger percentage of the overall American population. When we take a look at aging and ageism, there is nothing wrong with growing old. It is not a four-letter word. Aging is a natural part of the human life experience. It is not shameful. It's not embarrassing. There's no need to deny it. In many environments, people regarded living to a ripe old age as being a blessing. While right now, for some seniors, for some folks in America, aging is regarded more as a curse than a blessing. When we take a look at how the generations tend to segregate in our country, we see different stereotypes come into play. And we see younger people who regard elders as different and in many cases inferior. This is not helped by how older adults are presented in the media. The little cartoon you see there where a younger food server is working with an older couple, and the food server says, "How about a refill for the young lady?" If you're of a certain age, I pretty much guarantee you have heard this type of speech. If you're younger and you've been out, with your parents or your grandparents, I'm sure you've heard this. Now, I don't believe for a moment that the food server would classify herself as an ageist. But clearly her customer is not a young lady. And by saying, what would the young lady like today, what she is doing is denying aging as though it is somehow shameful or embarrassing or something that nice people don't quite talk about in public. So even that very, very quick transaction, what would the young lady like to drink, is an example of ageism and what we're going to refer to later as a microaggression. How prevalent is ageism? It's pretty common because it is virtually impossible to hide your age. When we meet people in person, researchers have found that we instantly categorize them by three separate criteria. We instantly identify their gender, their race, and their age. And we pick up on all three of these factors both instantly and essentially simultaneously. Their race, their gender, and their age. So it's hard when we meet people in person to not have some kind of an idea of how old they are. But what if we don't meet them in person? What if we talk to them over the phone? Well, very often somebody's voice may indicate their age as well. If a child answers the phone, you very commonly will be aware that it's not an adult. So our voice is a good indicator, not the only indicator, not foolproof, but our voice is a good indicator of our overall age. Say that our voice does not give a clue as to our age. Very often, what we do is how we speak might be a giveaway. For example, what you or I would call a sofa, my grandparents referred to always as a Davenport. Even though they had a refrigerator in their kitchen, they still referred to it as an icebox. So just manners of speech like that can be a giveaway to say, you know what, I must not be talking to a young person if they're talking about a Davenport and if they are talking about an icebox. If somebody is referring to the rabbit ears on their TV, you remember, are you old enough to remember rabbit ears? We know we're not dealing with a young person. There's also different figures of speech that might give it away. For example, one of my older clients who is in her early 90s, and she is a remarkable woman, she loves using her smartphone and to look up data. And she always says, oh, Guy, you know what I just discovered on the Google? Not Google, but the Google. And that's kind of a giveaway that we are not dealing with a younger person, just in her manner of speaking. So ageism is prevalent. It's hard to hide your age. What about an environment where we don't see people face to face and we don't speak to them directly? For example, how about people who are applying for a job? So they send in a resume or an application and they put the year they graduated high school or college. Or they put down the number of years they have been in the workforce. What we're doing right now is we are aiding and abetting an ageist employer into discriminating against us because we are essentially saying how old we are. I don't know if you're aware of it, but by federal employment law, asking a job candidate when they graduated high school or college falls under the category of illegal job discrimination because we are asking in effect for their age. I don't know if you're aware of it, but asking a job candidate for their driver's license before an employment offer is made is actually age discrimination because as soon as we see that driver's license, we're going to know how old they are. So very often, in addition to the overt or obvious signs of being older, we are aiding and abetting ageist employers by giving them information that legally they have no right to before a job offer is made. So ageism is quite prevalent. It's hard to hide your age, and sometimes people are just providing way too much information, especially when it comes to a job application. We'll talk about this more in a little bit because you could make the case that age discrimination in employment in the fitness industry is absolutely rampant. The language of ageism. It's not just what we say, it is how we say it. Running across the screen at the very bottom, are some of the terms commonly associated with older adults. Some of them are more common. Some of them have got the veneer of sophistication or humor. Some are downright vulgar, but these are all different ways in which we can refer to older adults. Some of them are a bit more polite and acceptable, like senior citizen. Some, like blue hair or old coot, not quite so much. But where I'm going here is that ageism has its own unique vocabulary. We would never refer to a young person as spry. We would never refer to a young person as dapper. Some of these terms are virtually guaranteed to annoy older adults. Like my group in Wilton Manors, if they are referred to as elderly or geriatric, they get downright belligerent, and they are not shy about letting their feelings be known, because there is a connotation associated with terms like geriatric or elderly that is not compatible with how many older adults see or view themselves. You know, the ageist language can have a veneer of humor. Oh, I'm just kidding. If I'm calling you an old fart, I'm just kidding. I don't really mean it. Or of sophistication. You're not old, you are well seasoned. You are vintage like a fine wine. These are things that we say that impart the idea that older adults are different. And even though they have a veneer of humor or sophistication, again, it can be considered a microaggression. It hurts. But the problem is that for many older adults, if they protest, if they get angry, if they say, please don't use that language, or do not refer to me like that, now they are bad sports, or they are overly sensitive, or they are thin-skinned. So often they smile and nod and shrug it off, but the hurt is still there. These are all falling under the category of what we're going to refer to as microaggressions. So the language of ageism is not just what we say, it's how we say it. Here's another example, and I'm not quite sure why we're picking on food servers today, but the food server is using a handheld credit card machine to collect the bill. And she's saying, this is a new way to use your credit card. Can I explain it to you? As though her older couple has never seen one before, or that they are too old and too senile and too decrepit to know how to use it. So again, it's not just what we say, it's how we say it, and it is our own belief system that goes into our language that determines whether or not what we are saying is ageist. So it's not just what we say or our vocabulary, it is how we say it. A term was first coined back in the mid-1990s to describe the way that some ageist folks talk to older adults. It is called elder speak. Elder speak is essentially baby talk aimed at seniors. If you are talking to a small child or to your dog or your cat, you don't use the same vocabulary, the same intonation, the same manner of speaking as though you were talking to a peer or to another adult. If I'm talking to the dog, I'll say, hey, you want to go outside? You want some supper? Oh, sorry, she got briefly excited when she heard that. But if we are talking to a small child or adult, we speak to them differently because we are not talking to a peer. And if we are talking to a small child or to our pet, we are talking to somebody who is not at our same level of intellect. Elder speak is doing the same thing to older adults. It tends to be condescending and very, very patronizing. When we are employing the examples of elder speak, we speak slowly. We tend to smile very frequently. We nod our head up and down. We use very, very short, simple words and sentences, and we take our pitch up a bit. Our sentence structure is very, very simple, and we repeat key words over and over. So here, for example, in the photograph, we have a healthcare worker talking to an older adult. And you can just imagine what this sounds like. How are we today, sweetie? Why, how pretty we look. Are you ready for a good breakfast? Yum, yum, yum. We would not talk to a peer or an equal like this. Condescending, patronizing is the way it goes. One of my very favorite clients, Doris, is in her early 80s. She was a kindergarten teacher for almost 50 years. So even though she has been retired for a good number of years, whenever she talks to anyone of whatever age, she still talks like a kindergarten teacher. It is just now in her DNA. It is who she is. And very often, if we are dealing with older adults, we are not even aware of it. We're falling into this habit of elder speak. If our older adults are cognitively deficient, we might get away with it. But many of them who are sharp and efficient and cognizant, they're aware of it and they find it deeply insulting and are deeply resentful of it. One of my clients, David, is a PhD in economics, and he was a university professor for most of his career. Now in his early 80s, he has Parkinson's, and he's struggling. One of the ways he is struggling is the Parkinson's, as it does as the disease progresses, is affecting his speech. His speech is very, very slow, very hesitant, and very halting. This has nothing to do with his intellect. David is still absolutely as sharp as he ever was when he was working as an economics professor. But because of how he speaks, people assume that he is in cognitive decline and they go into elder speak with him, which absolutely infuriates him because they are treating him as though he was mentally deficient. So we've got to be very, very careful with this because our seniors pick up on it. And no one likes to be patronized or spoken to in a condescending way. So elder speak is something we need to be aware of. And if you have never heard the term before, next time you are talking to an older client or an older loved one, listen to what you are saying and how you are saying it, and see if you are a victim or if you are victimizing your older adults by using elder speak. When we take a look at ageism, we know that stereotypes and caricatures are a big part of ageist thought, mannerisms, and behavior. And stereotypes play a huge role in the media. If we take a look at how the elderly are depicted in the media, they are often stereotypically depicted as stupid, slow, cranky, grouchy, unproductive. These are not adjectives that are designed to make us feel good about ourselves. And the media plays a major role in promoting these stereotypes because it is amusing. It's humorous. When I said earlier in our presentation that ageism might be the last acceptable ism, take a look at how older adults are presented very often in the media, and you will see exactly what I mean. We would not see such blatant examples of racism or sexism in the media in most cases as we do with ageism. Now, if you're of a certain age, if like me, you're an aging baby boomer or older, you might remember Saturday nights back in the 70s, 10 o'clock, the Carol Burnett Show. A very, very popular show. It is still running in syndication and probably will be until the end of time. But you might remember the Tim Conway character, the doddering old man, who was often accompanied by the Carol Burnett character as the doddering, slow-witted old woman. They were presented as humorous caricatures. But the bottom line is that often there is enough truth in a stereotype or a caricature to make it resonate. If we go to another generation, if you're a millennial or a Gen Xer, you probably remember the Golden Girls. If you remember Sophia, the mother of the Golden Girl, she was presented as a stroke survivor who said inappropriate things and could always be counted on for a punchline. The actress Estelle Getty, who played Sophia, was actually the youngest of the 4 women who starred in the Golden Girls. But they slapped a pair of eyeglasses on her and a gray wig, and suddenly she was the mother. She was a very humorous character, but the humor was based on the stereotype of an older woman who had no filters, who would say anything, who was outrageous to get a punchline. If we move forward to another generation, the Muppets, and very often, you'll see them present as well, we've got the two grumpy old men. I believe that they are Waldorf and Statler. I'm not sure who is who. But they are the grumpy old curmudgeons. You can't please them. They are always unhappy. They say wildly inappropriate, offensive things, and it's presented as humor. I've tried to take examples of different generations, so no matter where you are on the age spectrum, you've got a point of reference here. But how the media, in these cases, and many, many others, presents older adults is based on a stereotypical idea of what ageism is all about. During the pandemic, I know a lot of my clients spent their time watching the Hallmark movie channel because, watching the Hallmark Christmas movies of the beautiful New England towns that always have a happy ending was a great way of escapism during the pandemic. But if you've ever watched the Hallmark channel, especially the Christmas movies, the older adults are always, always presented as a saint-like figure. They're wise, they're patient, they know everything. Very often they die by the end of the movie, but it's a different presentation. And whether we are presenting older adults as doddering old fools or as wise, patient, all-knowing saints, we are still missing the reality of what it is for an individual to be older. And in reality, the vast majority of older adults, they're active, energetic people. They live independently. They're not saints, but they're also not punchlines. And this is how the media portrays them. The common senior stereotypes, we've talked about some of these. The doddering old fool. Think of Tim Conway on the Carol Burnett Show. The hip young grandma who is out disco dancing and skateboarding. The dirty old man who is chasing the young women. The man-crazy old woman. This was the direct antecedent of what we called in the 90s and the early 2000s the cougar. You guys remember the cougar? The middle-aged woman who was out chasing younger men. We've got the nosy old neighbor. If you remember the TV show Bewitched, remember Mrs. Kravitz, the nosy old lady who was always peering from behind the curtains? We've got the aging narcissist, the one who has had so much plastic surgery that he or she does not even resemble a human anymore. These are common senior stereotypes. But again, the reality is that it is hard to pigeonhole, to characterize our seniors into just one of these different stereotypes. My older adults are active, vital people, but they're not skateboarding. They're not bungee jumping. They're not skipping rope. So the idea is that these stereotypes are harmful if we buy into them because we are losing the diversity and the wide range of personalities that make up our older clients. If we take a look at advertising, aging stereotypes are alive and well in advertising. In many ads directed at older adults, they portray older adults in terms of what they cannot do, not in terms of ability, but in terms of disability. Or they paint them as powerless victims. They sell on the deepest, most deeply seated fears that many older adults have. And what are older adults afraid of? Well, they're afraid of being crime victims. They're afraid of having dementia or cognitive decline. Afraid of having their money taken. They're afraid of being charged and overcharged for medical expenses. Personal things like wearing diapers or of sexual dysfunction are inherent. And of course, I've fallen and I can't get up is part of our lexicon. They're afraid of being swindled by telephone scams. The bottom line is, if we take a look at research from the U.S. government, older adults are not crime victims any more than any other age group. It is very, very well publicized, but all members of society are potentially victims depending on the crime and on the environment. You know, and very often these ads are just so blatantly false. Many of my clients are wearing disposable undergarments because of incontinence or prostate problems. I'm not sure any of them are so giddy that they're out disco dancing on the beach because they're just so happy to be wearing disposable undergarments. You know, these are all things that over time, build up in the psyche of the older adult. And it becomes, again, forms of microaggression where we begin to affect the self-esteem of older adults. If you take a look at daytime TV, if you watch the cable news channels, the cable talk shows, the commercials, one after another, are involved with showing ageist stereotypes about older adults. And if you watch enough of this, it is virtually impossible not to absorb it and buy into the idea that older adults are powerless victims and that everyone is out to get them, to swindle them, to hurt them, or to take advantage. What we see as these stereotypes take root is there are four types of ageism that have been identified. What is called personal ageism, which is just, the idea that one age group is superior to another. Institutional ageism is when an organization has policies and procedures that discriminate against older adults. Arguably the most common type of institutional ageism we see might be among airline pilots who still have a forced retirement age, and I believe it is still 65. It is ludicrous to think that a pilot at 64 years and 364 days is competent, but the day he or she turns 65, they're incompetent. Institutional ageism might be a health club or a gym that is resistant to hiring older trainers or older staff. Intentional ageism is based on the idea that we can take advantage of people because of their age. Those advertising commercials that prey on a senior's fears, that is intentional ageism. If you're an older worker and your manager is always asking for special favors of you because he or she is convinced that you are so afraid of losing your job that you'll do anything, that is intentional ageism. And implicit ageism is just the belief that older adults are somehow different, that they are resistant to change, they are grumpy, that there is a bias against them based on what we believe are the characteristics that go along with advancing age. And even people who are rampant, blatant ageists will usually get out of it by explaining that of course they're not ageist. For example, I'm not an ageist, I love my grandparents. This is the equivalent of a racist who is saying, I am not a racist, some of my best friends are, and fill in whichever ethnic group that you like. How about the idea that I can't be an ageist, I'm older myself? Both these are absurd. It is a comparison that is both faulty and incorrect. The different types of ageism could be personal, and here are some examples. As perhaps a trainer is uncomfortable with working with older adults, or just does not like older adults, but they can't say, I don't like old people. So what they might do is if an older client is seeking their services, raise their rates. Maybe their going rate is $75 an hour, but they're going to charge the older adults $100 an hour in the hope that they will go somewhere else. Personal ageism. Institutional. That gym who says, I only hire younger staff. And often they will deflect this by saying, well, it's not me. My customers, our members, only want younger trainers. Intentional. A manager is trying to cover a holiday shift. I'll ask Mark to work New Year's Eve. He's over 70. I'm sure he has no plans, so he'll do it. And the implicit ageism is assuming that all seniors are resistant to change, to learning new things, so not even bothering. This could be the type of thing that I heard quite frequently during the pandemic. Oh, I would love to work with my clients on Zoom, but they're too old. They can never learn the technology, so why even bother? That is an implicit type of ageism. So as we take a look at these examples, we will see that ageism is quite common, both in society in general and in the fitness industry in particular. I have mentioned the term microaggression a couple of times. Microaggression can be referred to as the death of 1,000 cuts. It's based on the idea that any targeted group, the target of stereotyping or discrimination or prejudice, is exposed to these prejudices, this discriminatory behavior, on a regular basis. Often it is not overt. Often people are unaware they're doing it. It might be couched as humor, but it cuts, it hurts, it has an effect. If your senior client forgets how to do a particular skill, and you say, oh, looks like you're having a senior moment, and you both have a good laugh, that is a microaggression. If you say to your senior client, oh, don't worry about it, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that is a microaggression. If you say, well, this is how we do it now, back in your day, you did it differently, that is a microaggression. A microaggression, whether intentional or not, communicates hostile, negative, and insulting language to the older adult client, and over time, it's absorbed. It hurts. This negativity has consequences. And that is why we say that ageism can kill. There is very, very well-regarded, well-established research that shows that when older adults buy into the idea that they are inferior, that youth is superior, that people regard them as not quite as good, or as foolish, or as stupid, or as slow, and they absorb it, they tend to self-isolate. They tend to not associate with others as much as they probably would or could otherwise. With isolation comes behaviors. It could be lack of exercise. It could be over drinking. It could be overeating. These behaviors lead to isolation, to depression, to higher levels of stress, and they can in fact adversely affect health, and in extreme cases they can kill. You guys know that stress is a killer, and the stress that results from ageism and from microaggressions can over time play a role on the heart and can have negative health benefits up to and including killing somebody. Now, one of the questions that I get asked quite frequently, especially when we discuss ageism with my seniors, is can seniors be ageist? And the answer is they absolutely can. After being exposed to a lifetime of negativity about aging, and remember, our negative feelings towards aging, often begin well before we are older adults ourselves. After being exposed to a lifetime of negative attitudes, we internalize it. And what are some classic examples of seniors being ageist? Lying about your age. Why on earth would we lie about our age? Unless we feel deeply that being old is somehow bad, that it is shameful, that we can't admit to it, that being younger is better than being older. And if we take a look at how many people lie about their age, we can see that internalized ageism is extremely common. How about older adults who are offended at terms like older? It is a simple matter of facts. If we regard being called older or a senior as some kind of a slight or a slur, that says a lot about how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about the aging process. Now, keep in mind that different terms have different connotations. I refer to my older adults as older adults, and that's how I refer to them as I'm speaking to them as a group. And every now and then one will get offended. But I'm not quite sure what other term you can use beyond the very descriptive clinical designation as older. I would never refer to my folks as geriatric, because they're not. I would never refer to them as elderly, because these are hot button words that make people angry or ashamed. I would never use that kind of a term. But when feel strongly about being referred to by our age demographic, older, middle-aged, younger, that says a lot about how we feel about the aging process. I've had clients who get offended if they are offered a senior discount. The senior discount, well, I think, is a benefit. I started getting offered senior discounts in my late 40s. And after the initial shock, it was like, oh, well, you know what? Saving 10 or 15% or getting a free dessert in a restaurant might not be that bad a thing. But these are all examples of seniors being ageist against themselves. Common examples of ageist self-talk. How many of us have used this one? I am having a senior moment. It is based on the idea that as we age, our mind deteriorates. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I don't even know where to begin with what's wrong, all the things that are wrong with that statement. And by the way, I have an older dog. If she's got the right motivation, specifically food, it's amazing what she can still learn, even though she's not a puppy anymore. Dancing at my age, really? Where is it written that older adults can't dance, or go camping, or go on a certain trip, or learn different skills? If they knew my real age, I'd never get promoted again. Because now we are ascribing ageist behaviors to somebody else. So these are all, and there are so many more of them, these are all common examples of ageist self-talk. How else are seniors ageist? Very often, older adults have got a barely concealed hostility or animosity towards young people. Have you ever heard an older person, a loved one or a client say, oh my God, my old doctor retired, my new doctor's 14 years old. Or, oh, kids today are just so stupid. Back in my era, fill in the blank. I don't think 18-year-olds are mature enough to vote. This is all a thinly veiled hostility towards younger people from older people. So seniors can be very, very ageist, not only towards other old people, but towards members of the younger demographic as well. Although basically, again, when we talk about ageism in our society, it is generally directed towards older people. So, what this is all leading up to is the question, and I've got to ask it, it's time for a self-inventory. Are you an ageist? And if you are, what effect does that have on your relationship with your older clients, assuming you have older clients, and what effect does it have on the quality of training and the training outcome for your older clients? We're going to see a series of statements. Just tell me, well, you can't, for a moment I thought we were in person, but just say or think to yourself if it is true or false. And then we're going to take a look at what the research tells us. You ready? Here we go. A 60-year-old man takes his 85-year-old mother to the doctor. The doctor says to the man, how is your mom feeling? Is that ageist? Yes or no? And the answer, of course, is yes, that is absolutely ageist. The doctor is diminishing the mother by referring to her as if she is not there or if she is not capable of answering for herself. My mom passed away almost 10 years ago at the age of 91. And for her last years when she could no longer drive, I was responsible for taking her to the doctor, mainly because of all my siblings, I had the most flexible schedule. And it used to amaze and annoy me at how many doctors would talk to me instead of talking to my mom. And my mother was extremely independent, sharp with the tack to the very end, and quite feisty. And I remember one time talking to her cardiologist. When the cardiologist asked me how my mom was, my mom smacked him across the legs with her cane and said, don't ask him, I'm right here. I can speak for myself. I'm not sure I was ever as proud of my mom as I was at that moment when she assaulted her doctor. Extreme, yes, but provoked, in my mind, absolutely. A food service is taking the order from a retired couple. It says, hello, young lady, what can I get you? Is it ageist? We talked about this earlier. Sure. The unspoken message is young is good and old is bad. A personal trainer says to their older client, I hope I can be fit like you when I'm your age. Sounds like a compliment. It's a microaggression because it's based on the idea that older adults are naturally deficient. So an older adult who is smart, active, vital must be an aberration. And I don't want to be like all those other slow older adults. I want to be like you because you are the one who is unique. This one is so appalling. A hairdresser says, I'll bet you were gorgeous when you were young. Is that ageist? Absolutely, because we are applying standards of beauty based on age. And it's also based on the idea that older adults cannot be attractive in and of themselves, and that youth is always better than old age. Years ago, I was a fitness director for a very, very large health club in Hollywood, Florida, and one of my trainers was training an older couple, and the trainer said to the woman, I'll bet your husband was a knockout when he was young. Without missing a beat, the wife said, I think he is still a knockout now, followed by a very, very awkward silence. What the trainer said, what the wife said, and what the silence said altogether spoke volumes about ageism and ageist behavior on the part of the trainer who was working with that couple. A millennial says to her boyfriend, your grandma is sharp as a tack. How many of us have used language like this? Is it ageist? You know where this is going. Absolutely. The presumption is that seniors are mentally deficient, so one who is not is praiseworthy. So these are all examples. There's a couple more coming up. A trainer says, you're amazing. Where do you get your energy? You know where this is going. Yes, it is ageist. It's based on the idea that older adults are naturally inactive and lethargic. And some of my older clients are whirlwinds. Can't keep up with them even in their 70s and 80s. The bottom line is that some older adults are lethargic, but some young people are lethargic, and vice versa. You know, I heard this one a lot early in the pandemic. Why do old people get the COVID vaccine first? And here in Florida, over 65 age group were the first ones approved for the COVID vaccine. Their lives are almost done. I'm just getting started. And this is really quite scary because the basis here is that young lives are worth more than old lives. And if we adopt that train of thought and we take it to its logical conclusion, that is downright scary. Can you believe Dave married a 35-year-old? He's 70. I guess they're perfect for each other. A dirty old man and a gold digger. Is it ageist? Absolutely. The bias here is defining what kind of love or relationship is appropriate or acceptable. And in our culture, realistically, we define many relationships as being appropriate based on the age, the gender, the ethnicity, the socioeconomic level of the two partners in the relationship. It's based on the idea that we simply cannot imagine that a younger person could be attracted to an older person just on their merits alone. That it's always going to be based on money or sex or a combination of both. And finally, you're very qualified. I was looking to hire a younger personal trainer. Oh, but it's not me. I would love to hire you, but our members want younger trainers. It's patronizing, it's condescending, and it is illegal job discrimination. One of my continuing education clients, a man in his mid-60s, was turned down for a job that he was tremendously overqualified for at a big box gym. And the fitness director said, you know what, you're very well qualified, but I can't hire you, you are too old. We need a younger trainer because that is what our clients want. Why he did not march down to the EEOC and file an employment discrimination claim is beyond me, because in my experience, they would have taken that claim very seriously. And also in my experience, for whatever it is worth, Just threatening to file a discrimination claim against an employer will get their attention and often make them reconsider whether or not they want to hire the person they had just been discriminating against. Finally, did you hear? Monica and Marty are getting married. They're in their 70s. Here we're going to whisper. Do you think they still have sex? That's disgusting. Well, the idea that as we age, our need for touch, for intimacy, goes away is ageism at its very worst. Humans need touch. We need intimacy. We need to be around other people. And here's the deep, dark secret. Old people have sex. Like young people, some old people have lots of sex. Also like young people, some old people don't have as much sex. But keep in mind that intimacy, that sex, that companionship does not always mean intercourse. It could just be touching or holding or caressing. The idea that older people having sex is dirty or vulgar or disgusting minimizes the relationship and speaks volumes about how we feel about the aging process. When I worked in skilled nursing, or when I've had loved ones in skilled nursing, it used to amaze me how often I would talk to somebody and they would just hold me. They would hold my hand or touch my arm. They would have their hand on my leg, or they would hold my face as we were saying hello or goodbye. And I came to realize that many of them were just so starved for companionship, for touch, that just having that literally, that connection, was providing a huge service. To this day, many of my older adults in my classes in Wilton Manors hug me hello and goodbye. At first it was a bit alarming, because generally I'm not really a touchy-feely kind of a guy, but I know now that it's just one part of the process, the progression, and of the service. And it's funny, because when a couple of my regulars started hugging me, people would watch and say, well, why are they getting hugs? Why don't I get a hug? And now, in many cases, as class begins or ends, it's kind of like there's a receiving line there of people, giving and receiving hugs. Again, the implication here is that our need for touch, for a connection, does not go away just because we are old or older. As we begin to wrap this up, baby boomers are the dominant demographic in fitness right now and will be for the next 20 to 25 years. When we're taking a look at ageism in fitness, many ageist beliefs and behaviors are directed towards aging boomers because there's just so many of them. Assumptions of aging in fitness: are your policies, are your procedures ageist? Even if you are not, are your behaviors ageist? Do you only offer super simple chair classes for older adults based on the assumption that they are all going to fall down and break a hip? In my experience, in my strength conditioning classes, my seniors love the battle ropes. We have used TRX, we have used kettlebells, all very successfully. If our marketing ignores older adults because we say, they're on a fixed income, they can't afford it, we are missing a very important business opportunity. If we don't want seniors in our facility because it's going to ruin the vibe, ruin the environment, they're grouchy, they're going to complain, they're not going to like the music or the parking or the cleanliness or the temperature. Again, ageism on display, and ageism that is hurting both the client and is hurting our own bottom line if we're in business to make money. And aren't we? I hear this one all the time. Oh, I don't want a lot of seniors in my facility. They're all going to want to listen to the big bands. Big bands? Well, my goodness, that was the World War II generation, the youngest of which is 97, and there's not a whole lot of people, in my experience, 98, 99, 100 in your average gym. Older adults right now, the aging baby boomer, what they are listening to is rock and roll in the 1960s and 70s, R&B, from the 60s and 70s, Motown. This is older adult music right now. And all of these assumptions are based on ageist beliefs. And the bottom line is we are under-programming our older clients. We are not giving them the benefits they could be getting from fitness, and we are not giving them the quality of life that they could otherwise have. These are other ageist assumptions. We've talked about many of them already, all with the same end result. We are diminishing our older clients. And the results are they're just not going to get a good workout. They're not going to be as strong. They're not going to be as independent. They're not going to have the good quality of life that we know comes from fitness and activity and exercise. So what do we do about ageism? First, and a big part of what I was trying to do with our discussion today, is recognize what ageism is or is not, to be aware of ageist beliefs and behaviors that you might be guilty of perpetrating. Recognize if you have got a fear of aging yourself. And if you do, what are you really afraid of? What are you afraid of with the aging process? Is it losing your physical strength? Is it losing your attractiveness? Is it coming towards the end of life and eventually facing your own mortality? What is it that you fear about the own aging process? Resist the cult of youth. And finally, don't assume. Don't assume that your clients have no interest in strength training, or they want to listen to a certain type of music, or that they don't want to try something new. Ask them, describe, and give them a choice in their own programming. To be realistic, our older clients are never going to be 25 again, but I don't believe they expect to be, but not to be condescending about it. To avoid the comments and the jokes. Oh, a senior moment. Can't teach old dogs new tricks. And finally, remember that older adults, they were not born older adults. They were once young and as active and as vital as all of us either are or were at one point in our life. They've had a whole lifetime of experiences. They were young. They had their trials, their tribulations, their heartbreak, their heartache. They raised their kids. And many of our seniors are just survivors. And we need to be aware of that and to appreciate that and build that into our awareness and our understanding of what the aging process is all about. And the bottom line is, don't look at the stereotype. Don't think of them as a punchline. Look at them as individuals and give them the individual treatment that they deserve to make their latter years the best possible years of their life. And that, my friends, is our discussion for today. Hopefully, if I have done my job, you've learned some new things, and you might have some things to think about and to examine about your own personality, your own beliefs, your own policies. That ageism quiz that we did earlier, feel free to rewind this video and show it to your clients or show it to your employees if you're a fitness director or if you're an employer, and have an open, honest discussion about ageism in your facility. Okay, how to get your continuing education certificates. Well, if you've gotten to this point, you have seen the complete webinar. Go on to our website, exerciseetc.com, click on Administration, click on Webinar on Demand Certificates. Choose the exact title of this webinar, Old Age is Not Contagious, Ageism in the Fitness Industry. From there, you will pull down your quiz. You will do the short 10-question quiz, fill in the answer sheet, fill in the evaluation, fill out everything else that's required, and then click Get Certificate. Assuming you get a 70%, your certificate will be emailed to you immediately. If you don't see it, check your junk or your spam folder, especially if you have AOL or Yahoo or Comcast. Okay? And that's how you'll get your CE certificate. As always, if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to email me at any time. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me today. Hope you have learned something. And as one of my senior clients once told me, when we were having a birthday party at the senior center for her 85th birthday, said, you know what, Guy? People don't go to the birthday party for the candles, they go for the cake. So aging, it's not about the candles, it's all about the cake. And on that note, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.